Hello everyone, welcome to SwitchUp and a very happy new year to you all too. Today we have our regular monthly roundup of the scores given on SwitchUp, with this video looking at the scores for last month being December. We will look at the 10 games that got the best scores throughout the month, starting with the game that got the lowest score, moving up of course to the game that got the highest review score as per our scoring system. Links to the full reviews for all 10 games will be in the top pinned comment, as well as any other relevant videos, and it was a decent month all told. So with all that said, let's jump in. Starting off with the 10th best scoring game for December then, which was Empire of Sin. This turn-based strategy game saw you taking on the role of a mob boss in 1920s Chicago, trying to build up your criminal empire. This involves taking over businesses as well as going to war with the other factions of the city, although you don't have to take the aggressive route and you can try to be a bit more diplomatic. Whilst the gameplay is compelling and very enjoyable and the turn-based element of it works well, there were a few issues in terms of the AI, and it seemed as if being aggressive was always the best way, making some of the other pathways a little redundant. As well as this, there were some issues with bugs, although this game has received a patch since our review, and we have revisited it since in one of our patched up videos. The link to that as well as the review will be in that top pinned comment as I mentioned. Still a very enjoyable game though, even in that pre-patched state, and in our review it got a SwitchUp score of 77%. In 9th place for the month we had Mercenaries Blaze, Dawn of the Twin Dragons. This is obviously a part of the Mercenaries series, and they are tactics games, with the first 3 available as a collection on the Switch and the 4th game also on there, joined now of course by this 5th one. Each story or side mission takes place on an isometric grid, and you will choose the placement of your team and then partake in a turn-based battle, attempting to wipe out your opponents from the map, thus ensuring victory. It offers gameplay that is simple yet challenging, and doesn't seem to rely as much on grinding as earlier games in the series, which was a blessing for sure. It's a perfectly solid adventure, with anyone that's played the series before probably knowing exactly what they're getting, and it is priced reasonably well. On the more negative side, the visuals aren't particularly impressive or inspiring in any way at all, plus the pacing is off initially, although this does improve as the game goes on. A good game overall though, and it got a SwitchUp score of 78%. Next for the month then we had Sam and Max Save the World. This is a remastered version of Telltale Games' 6-part episodic series, which began releasing in 2006 and stars the titular Sam and Max, who are trying to solve a series of cases based around a central theme of hypnotism. This equates to a point and click adventure spread across those 6 episodes, with a very heavy emphasis on humour, and the film noir style storytelling fused with that aforementioned humour definitely works very well, with the characters being just as endearing and charming as they were when this series first released. The one slight negative for me was that the puzzles never really got you thinking as much as I would have liked, but if you enjoyed the series back in the day then I'm sure this won't be an issue, and if you've never played it before then it's definitely worth experiencing all these years later. Overall, it got a SwitchUp score of 78%. In 7th place for the month then we had Puyo Tetris 2. This follows its predecessor on the Switch and is once again published by Sega. Now this series takes 2 very popular series in their own right, Puyo and of course Tetris, and fuses them together, and not by just putting the 2 games on one cartridge. Whilst you can play the 2 games separately, there are also a huge amount of gameplay modes which merge them together, which sets up some really interesting multiplayer games, be it online or locally, where one person can be playing Tetris, competing against someone playing Puyo, or even gameplay modes where they switch periodically, meaning that you essentially have to keep an eye on 2 games at once. The main issue is that there's only really been one extra gameplay mode added since that first game, and whilst they have made improvements to the online mode, these two on their own are not enough to justify paying out for the game again if you own the first. If you do not though, this one is definitely the one to get. Check out my review if you want to know a bit more, but this one got a SwitchUp score of 80%. Coming in at number 6 was our final review for the month. This was Super Meat Boy Forever. This highly anticipated and long awaited sequel to Super Meat Boy took the series in a slightly different direction, with the gameplay now more akin to an auto runner. This change in direction wasn't necessarily bad, but it was certainly different, and whilst it was helped along by the fact that it did still feel like a Super Meat Boy game, it will certainly take some getting used to. It still has that classic brutally tough but incredibly rewarding gameplay. The production values have been taken up a notch, and whilst it is more expensive than the first game, it is still fairly reasonably priced. On the more negative side, the levels this time are randomly generated, and whilst that isn't necessarily a negative in and of itself, there were a few bugs when it came to this method. A highly polished and fun, if masochistic, platformer still awaits for those that can get on board with the new controls, and it got a SwitchUp score of 81%. In 5th place then we had Football Manager 2021 Touch. This is the 4th iteration of the Football Manager Touch series to come to the Switch, and it once again brings Football Manager's classic gameplay to Nintendo's hybrid device, with the Touch version being a streamlined experience compared to its PC brother, but it is a case of trimming the fat rather than leaving anything integral out. The database is still impressive, and there have been some improvements to the user interface this year that do make the matchday experience much more enjoyable. However, you can still only select up to 3 nations within a save, and it's a shame that this hasn't been increased. Plus they have tried to improve the amount of control options, which sounds like a positive, but they seem to have confused themselves a little bit, meaning this one does take a bit more getting used to if you are a veteran of the series. It's still fantastic fun though, trying to build your favourite team up, and it got a SwitchUp score of 82%. In 4th place was a fun game called Monster Sanctuary. This seemed to fuse Metroidvania mechanics with a monster catching and battling system, best known for its use in the Pokemon series. You took your team of monsters through the world, battling other trainers as you came across them, whilst also using your monsters' abilities to open up more of the world as you went along. The two gameplay styles fit together very well and made for a very enjoyable experience, plus the designs of the monsters were incredibly fun and interesting to look at. The same couldn't necessarily be said of the world in general, with things just having that feeling about them that they'd been done elsewhere many times before, but on the whole, still a very good game, and one that I know our community have really enjoyed judging by the comments in that particular review, and it got a SwitchUp score of 82%. Into the top 3 for the month now, and in 3rd place, one of the bigger releases, this is Immortals Fenyx Rising. This action-adventure game from Ubisoft seemed to take elements of some of their own franchises, such as the Assassin's Creed games, whilst borrowing elements from games such as Breath of the Wild most specifically, to produce a very enjoyable experience of exploration and combat wrapped in a very enticing setting of Greek mythology. The world itself brings a lot to discover, and the combat system is interesting, and whilst the game at launch did have some technical issues, it has received a couple of patches since then, and it is another game featured in that patched up video I mentioned, link again in that top pinned comment. Even with those issues at launch, it was still good enough to be our 3rd place game for the month of December, and had it released in the state it's in now, it probably would have scored even higher, but nonetheless it got a SwitchUp score of 84%. In second place for the month was a bit of a blast from the past. This was BIT.TRIP Runner. This game originally came out back in 2010 on WiiWare and is part of the fantastic BIT.TRIP series, each of which takes a simple but very addictive gameplay style and presents it with a retro aesthetic, accompanied by a fantastic chiptune music score. You take on the role of Commander Video and must get him to the end of each stage, avoiding a number of obstacles as you go, and each time you jump or avoid one of the said obstacles, this action will add to the musical score. The game is incredibly difficult, and being the first in the BIT.TRIP Runner series doesn't use checkpoints. Whilst of course this makes the game a lot harder, it's not a deal breaker for the most part as the levels are very short. However, every so often there is a level that's a bit longer, and this is where the flaws in the no checkpoint system are shown up. Even with this slight issue, the game is just pure fun, factoring in that it sells for an incredibly cheap price, and this one is definitely worth trying if you haven't done so before, and if you have, I'm sure you'll agree that it's a wonderful time. It got a SwitchUp score of 87%. And finally, our best scoring game for the month of December 2020. It was a game that actually also made our viewers' top 10 list of the year. This is Doom Eternal. This game was scheduled to come out earlier on the Switch but was unfortunately delayed, but it was a case of better late than never when it finally did show up, as Panic Button once again did a great job of bringing a very demanding game across to the Switch. Yes, of course, sacrifices needed to be made in the graphical department, as I'm sure many people would expect anyway, but the gameplay is just as fun, picking up where 2016's Doom left off with that same frenetic action. Other positives include the fact that it runs very well in handheld mode, plus other Switch features such as gyroscopic aiming and HD rumble are implemented to a very good standard. As well as the graphical limitations mentioned earlier, it's also a shame it hasn't received a physical release as of yet. Let's hope that changes in the future, but as it stands, it's still an absolutely wonderful game, and it got a SwitchUp score of 90%. So there you have it, there were the 10 best scoring games for the month of December, the final month of course of 2020. I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you very much for everyone that watched this series throughout the year of 2020. We saw some fantastic growth numbers in this series around about July time, and it seems as if a lot of you do really enjoy this recap of our reviews. Plus of course it serves as an easy place to come to for links to all of those reviews if there is one you want to watch again or missed the first time round. A quick thank you to our Patreons as always for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, stay safe, again happy new year, and of course happy gaming.